Good evening all, and welcome. Trains are an essential part of many urban areas, whether it be for leisure or to get to work. I'm sure you'll find that there are people on each train who would like to get to know you a bit better, maybe more than you'd like to. For now though, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I'm a 23-year-old female. The night of this incident, I was travelling from Glasgow to Aberdeen by train, alone, late at night. At the Glasgow station, the train was almost empty. In my cabin there was me and another guy sitting at the opposite end of the corner, at the seat that was the most far away from me. The train makes many stops from Glasgow to Aberdeen. As it does, more people come in, but still not many on a Wednesday night at 10 p.m. As the train is about to leave Glasgow station, a man enters the cabin, and to my surprise, regardless of the vast choice of comfortable empty seats everywhere, he chooses to sit right next to me. I thought right away that it was extremely annoying since I had to move my bag that I had and overall reduce the space that I could occupy all around me. There was no reason for him to sit next to me, with all those empty seats and 4-seat slots all around. I figured he did it because as the train progressed, more people would come in. But that wasn't a good enough excuse, because usually not too many people do so. And also because he could have still been seated elsewhere and waited to have shared a space when and if the occasion actually arose. After he sits down, he says hi. I nod politely. A man in his 60s, normal weight, is all I notice about this individual. Nothing actually catches my attention about this man that is worth remembering. "Are you travelling alone?" he asks in an attempt to make conversation. "Yep," I reply briefly. I was really tired and not in the mood to make conversation. If he sat next to me for some words of company, he had chosen the wrong person at the wrong time. "Where are you going tonight, Lisa?" I heard him call me by name. I was startled, but then I thought I must have misheard it, and that it was not possible that he knew my name, and that it was just a trick of my ears. But I decided to not inquire as to how he knew my name, so that if in future he made the same mistake, I could have been sure he knew my name without me previously telling him. "I'm going to Aberdeen," I replied politely. I just wasn't sure if he had bad intentions, or if he was just a friendly pal, and I didn't feel like I could make such an assumption yet. "What are you going there for?" "Business," I lie, "but I just don't feel like sharing my life with this man, and I don't think he is entitled to know. Plus, I need to make sure he knows I am expected, and people know where I am going. I was actually directed to meet my old professor and have a chat with him, then maybe just wander around the city and enjoy it, but nobody was really expecting me. At this point I'm very tired and do not have the mental energy to sustain a conversation, so I brush off the bad vibe this guy is sending me through my spine and listen to some music with my eyes closed. The train ride is 3 hours long, and I persist concentrating on my phone, while the man next to me tries to reignite the conversation every time he sees an opening. Months have passed now, and I can't quite remember what he was saying. I was indeed extremely tired and very unwilling to dedicate my time to him. As we approach Aberdeen, my phone is in extremely low battery, so I decide it's better to save the remaining. As I put away my phone, I see with the corner of my eyes that his torso is directed towards me. I look up, and he is smiling creepily. Because I was in public transport, I felt more annoyed by his behavior than scared, because I knew, as long as I was in the middle of civilization, nothing could happen to me. "What job do you do?" I asked him to divert the stream of questions he was asking me about my job, where I live, and where I was going. "I'm a charity worker," he says. "Can you be a bit more specific?" Again, by this point, I wasn't actually sure if this guy was just trying to have a polite conversation or had more creepy intent. "I work with school kids." "Oh, and in which way do you help them?" I ask. I organize things, plans to help them." "Ah, what kind of plans?" Just regular organization for kids in need," he says, mumbling. I was surprised that he could not go into more details of the specific job he did, but I figured maybe he just didn't want to share. "Who is awaiting for you in Aberdeen?" he asks. "My friends will be there," I lie. "I could drive you back to their place," he says. "Nah, thank you." I insist, it's no problem for me. I got a chill down my spine thinking of being in a car alone with this man. I decline the invite once again. As the train stops in Aberdeen, he stands up right away to grab my luggage. "I'll carry it for you." "No need," I say, but I am ignored. Once we get out of the train station, I say thank you, but I will get my luggage from here. He says that he doesn't see anyone waiting for me, and that he can give me a ride, that it's dangerous for a girl to go alone. At this point, I lie again. "My friends will be here soon. Goodbye." No friends were waiting, so I waited for him to be out of sight, and then I run to the hotel I booked, while constantly checking if I was being followed. I was now in a street that was completely dark and empty. Aberdeen in winter is not the most lively of cities. I see a car approaching and slowing down. I start running. My hotel was only 3 minutes away at this point. I get inside and feel safe again. I kept wondering what would have happened if my respects for politeness and instincts hadn't kicked in, and I'd have accepted that ride. This is my grandma's story. She was born in the 40s, when folks were nice and nobody thought that people would be taken. She and her 9 siblings often took the trains by themselves, going to and from the big city where they lived and their grandparents' place that was a 4-hour train ride away. Usually they did this on weekends to give their mum and dad a break. One day, Grandma was 9, about to be 10 that weekend, and she was going to her grandparents' house a day before everyone else by herself. That was common and pretty ordinary. She got dropped off at the train station, got boarded on the train by her dad, and she went off. Half of the way there, the train makes one of its stops, and everyone is asked to evacuate because there's a malfunction with the rails. My grandma, Yara, is very scared, and she has no money to get on the train back. In the middle of the chaos, a man dressed as a train driver approaches her and asks if she's all right. He is an authority, and so she sees him as safe and explains everything. He says his next train is exactly towards where she wants to go, and says that she can come aboard the cabin and ride all the way there as his co-pilot. She is very excited and boards the train without a ticket, and sits as his co-pilot as promised. Halfway through the journey, she realizes it's taking way longer than the usual trip, and he gives excuses. "We're going a different route," he says. She steps away to go to the bathroom, and he doesn't want to let her go, and that's when he starts to panic. She manages to convince him, and after about 2 cabins, she asks someone where the train is heading. and they say a completely different town as to where she should be going. She doesn't say how, but she was crying and wandering the cabins, until she miraculously runs into one of her uncles, who listens to the story, and they get off at the next stop. He puts her on the right train, and she makes it back safely to the city where she lives, so not her grandparents. Apparently, none of her family made it a priority to find out who the guy was, though I suppose it'd be easy, since he worked for the train company or worked that route. Her uncle looked for the man a few times, but not with any determination. She had nightmares for years, and her parents stopped letting the little kids ride the train by themselves after that. For much of her youth, she was petrified that she'd run into him. So yeah, I hope that they never meet, but my grandma's 76 now, so it's unlikely. This particular event happened to me 3 years ago. I am a student at a university in a small town in Germany, but at the time this happened, I was studying German at a language school in Berlin. So yes, German is also not my mother tongue, and I was also pretty naive about my surroundings, as I came from a third world country. Everything outside the house is a hunting ground for the predator out there, as my dad would always put it. But my dad would constantly give me the impression that the first world countries are supposed to be really safe and regulated. Basically, the opposite of where we came from. So that's the mindset I've been going with, and it worked up until this happened. It started out innocently enough. In Berlin, there is an annual event called Carnaval der Kulturen. You get the idea. Parades with different songs, dances, costumes from different countries, and also stands with food and individual performances of different cultures. It was a big thing, and I had a great day. Now, originally, I planned to go home after it finished at around 6 to 7 p.m, but my friends wanted to hang out a bit more, so we hung out until about 10:30 p.m. Now, it is important to note that all of my friends live at the east side of the city, and I the west. So when it was time to go home, we rode a couple of stations together, before we parted ways, and I wasn't worried for going home alone at all. I mean, it wasn't even midnight yet, and this was the weekend, so there are going to be many people, right? Nope. When I split ways with my friends to ride a different train, the station was surprisingly empty. There was a couple on one side of the platform, and there was a guy on the far end of the other. So I took a seat on a nearby bench. The board says that the next train is coming in 15 minutes, which explained why the station was so empty. I had just missed the train. But no problem. 15 minutes isn't that long a wait. But boy, was it going to be the longest 15 minutes of my life. So, the guy on the far end of the platform I was waiting on walked in my general direction. He appears to be talking, but I didn't pay much attention to him, because I thought he was on the phone or something, and I was busy looking around, wondering if the train is going to come sooner. But as he got closer, I noticed how he is walking to my direction, on the bench, and still talking. No phone in sight. Okay, weird. But maybe he wanted to sit down. But what he did was stopped about 2 meters in front of me, gesturing with his hands, and at first I couldn't hear him. He smiled at me. I was caught off guard, looked at him strangely and said, "Sorry?" I found it strange that some random person would smile at me, and I believe said something in English and not German. But I didn't want to be impolite. Perhaps he needed help. "Girl, why don't you smile?" he repeated, in a pretty heavy African accent. What a weird question, so I just looked at him and didn't know what to say. "Why don't you smile? Smile, girl, you look beautiful when you smile." I was weirded out at this point, because first of all, I'm a pretty socially awkward person, and I'm not used to someone trying to hit on me. Or, that is what I initially thought. But this guy looked to be in his mid-40s, and is probably about 190 centimeters or more. I was 20 at the time, but I wasn't really looking into anyone older, so I mustered up a weak, awkward laugh. I guess he must have thought that was a green light, because he immediately lurched forward to sit close to me and asked if I spoke English, to which I said, yes, which in hindsight was stupid, as then he started asking for my name, age, where I came from, and bombarding me with all these questions, all the while caressing my thigh. I was so shocked at that moment. I tried to get away from his touch, but he still did it, seemingly unaware. I was not stupid, so I gave him a fake name and said I was 18. I thought that would deter him, but I was never more wrong, because then he started to get excited, introduced himself that he was 42 and had just come from Cameroon, and eagerly asked for my phone number, to which I said I didn't remember, which is true. But then this guy said I should go to my contacts and see my own phone number. He was smart, and I was just pretending to go along with it, because who knows how he would react otherwise. But the good thing was, he didn't bring his phone with him, and he kept insisting that we go somewhere to ask to borrow a pen. I replied with, "No, sorry, I have to go home soon," and then he proceeded to insist on taking me home. At this point, a couple noticed that something was wrong, but didn't try and help, and just kind of looked at us weirdly. I was very scared, and thought of my family at home, and how I might go missing after this. So then, I tried to answer his increasingly personal questions as vague as possible. I mean, at this point, a normal guy would notice I'm not interested, right? But he seemed unbothered and unaware, happily yapping away. The train came. Waves of relief washed over me, so I interrupted him and excused myself. He insisted I should stay and take the next train, but I said no, that I have to get home, and someone's waiting for me, and started to step towards the train. He grabbed my arm, just as I was taking my first step, and said, "Girl, I think you should stay a while with me. You can take the next train. I can take you home." I was freaking out really bad on the inside, but I managed to muster the most polite rejection possible. "I'm sorry, I need to go home now." I yanked my arm free and entered the train. I was relieved to see him sitting on the bank, and I thought it was the end. Just a bad night. I wish it were the end. As the warning chimes came in, warning passengers that the train doors were about to close, he stopped the train doors from closing and squeezed between them. My heart stopped, and he walked to my seat, which is a 2x2 seat, and he sat right in front of me saying, "Let me take you home. It's not safe out there for girls like you," while caressing both my thighs. Right. I tried to inch away from him. Now in the seats behind us were a group of teenagers, around 17 to 18. They sensed something was wrong because of my expressions, because they suddenly all fell quiet and just looked at each other. But then again, none of them did anything. So I have this guy asking me where I live, insisting he'll walk me home. At this point, I'm trying to think up plans on how to ditch this guy. But I can't go against a 190 centimeter tall dude as a medium-sized 167 centimeter girl. I need to be smarter about this. So I thought. I told him okay, but he can only drop me off at the station. He seemed really happy with that, but he said I needed to give him my number. My initial reaction was, what the hell? I can buy a new number. So I agreed. My station came around. We got off the train, and in front of the station is where another level of creepiness unfolds. "Okay, this is me. I can walk home now by myself as you promised," I said, hoping this was all over. And then he was insisting on getting my phone number. But at this time it was 11:30 p.m. and everything was closed. So he took out a bunch of keys from his pocket and asked me to write down my number on the gravels so that he could come back the next day and take notes of it. I was weirded out, but whatever. And so I tried to write down my number and thought I could sneak in some false number there and throw him off. In the middle of doing it, he kinda yanked my phone to see if I was writing the numbers right. "You gotta make sure you write it right so I can reach you tomorrow," he said. But thankfully it didn't work. I mean, the gravels move around a lot, and he wasn't able to see the numbers. He seemed agitated, and this is where I thought that I might get taken. "Girl, you're the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. I don't want to lose you. What am I gonna do now?" He was mumbling the whole time about borrowing a pen from a passing stranger. The street was still pretty much empty, but there were 3 to 4 people passing by. I think they knew something was amiss. However, as before, no one did a thing. The whole time I was just kind of grimacing awkwardly, if you know what I mean, because I was just scared out of my wits. The whole time his eyes were on me, scrutinizing every detail of my face. I felt like screaming for help, but I don't know if anyone is going to help me judging from the reactions I got so far. And then he asked, "Don't you like me? Am I too old?" He was emphasizing his age. I didn't want to agitate this guy, so I said, "No, it's not that. It's just that I already have a boyfriend." I was cringing, bracing for impact. His face contorted in annoyance, and then he took a deep breath and asked, "Where's your boyfriend? Is he here?" To which I replied, "Yes. You're young. You date. But maybe you don't find him good. You should keep your options open," he said. Well, I'll be damned. Now he's talking about options. Like I had any at that moment? And then without missing a beat, he told me that the only way we were going to do this is for me to meet him exactly at this place tomorrow, and that he's going to trust me, and asked me to set the time. I initially said, "I don't know, you decide." But he said, "No, you tell me when. So you have to come tomorrow. Think, girl." I was panicking and just blurted out, 3 p.m. "Okay, girl, 3 p.m. I trust you." He kind of lets his grip on my hips loose, so I thought I was free. But no. He started leaning in for a kiss, to which I automatically backed out of. "No, not on the lips," he said while touching my lips with his finger. "On the cheek." He said that while giving me the wettest smooch on both cheeks. I struggled so hard to not wipe at that very moment, because I really didn't want to agitate him. So I awkwardly laughed and said, "Okay, now I'm gonna go home. See you then." To which he said, 3 p.m. I trust you. And I just laughed awkwardly and said goodbye. I made an unnecessary turn ahead and hid in the bushes in case he decided to follow me. I waited for a minute or two and booked it straight home. At home, I was freaking out. I called up to one of my friends and started crying. I also washed my face twice while violently scrubbing. I recounted the whole event with my best German to my housemate, who was an older lady in her 70s. And she just said, "Oh, that happens around here to young ladies. He probably just fancies you." I was baffled, but whatever. It was over, and needless to say, I stayed home for 2 days straight, not wanting to run into that creep again, as we don't live very far from the station. This is a story from my childhood that I recently remembered while in the shower. I spent my childhood in Mallorca, with my grandparents. They lived in the middle of nowhere and didn't even have asphalt roads until I was 6, but I always loved it there. I used to explore the area all the time, and my grandparents weren't exactly overprotective, so I was alone a lot of the time, though I did do some hikes with Grandma. Plus, it's not like there's any danger around there. This story happened when I was about 10, and wandered further south on one of my lone hikes in the forest than ever before. Keep in mind, this is the forest with a sand floor, full of rocks, and generally pretty dry, not creepy in the slightest. I found a pair of rusty old train tracks that had obviously not been used in a very long time. They were overgrown, had plants sprout high between them, and in one massive spot, a huge tree branch extended across them. I followed them westward, for that was closer to the town I lived in, and ended up in what seemed to be an abandoned little village. I say village, but this wasn't like an old western mining town, just some wooden houses that had obviously been built quite recently, and some even had satellite dishes on them. However, all of them were locked with modern padlocks, and the windows were also dark, so I never found out what they actually were. There were no roads anywhere, just these strange houses built on stilts for some reason. This was neither usual nor necessary. The train tracks, however, ended in that abandoned village, and they did so quite unceremoniously, with just one of those full stop breaks you find near the end of train tracks, which was also pretty battered and rusty. I never found out where the train leads to the east, because it was far too long away for a boy of 10 years to do, and after showing my friends this certainly odd thing, we lost interest after a while. Enter one of those nightmares, in which nothing really happens, but you wake up with a feeling of dread. I was standing somewhere along the tracks during daytime, and a train with a proper steam-powered locomotive races by. The interesting thing were the passengers. They wore so many styles of exotic clothing, some of them so different that they didn't just quite fit. It wasn't just a different time period and culture, but styles you'd expect to see in sci-fi and fantasy films. A guy in a blue toga was sat next to a woman in a grey suit, ripped straight from a cyberpunk game. So I did what any curious 10-year-old boy would do, and went to see the tracks the next day. All the plants that had grown between the ties and over the tracks were severed clean or crushed, and that big tree branch was about a kilometre down the railroad that had broken off and had been thrown about 5 or 7 metres. The wound, if you call it that, was still pretty fresh, so it must have happened recently. The strange thing was that, judging from where I found the branch, the train must have come from the tiny settlement, which is impossible, considering that there is no train there in the first place. I told this to a friend of mine at school, and she claimed she had the same dream, though to be fair, she always talked about how she had psychic powers and stuff. Not to mention that she was into me, but we were primary school kids. Nothing weird ever happened after that, at least not concerning the railroad or the strange train. I'm a 16-year-old girl who has no common sense. In my 16 years on this earth, I've barely left my hometown. My family doesn't really do holidays, and I've only ever left the UK once, and that was a school trip to France. But you see, this has left me with a yearn for adventure that has never been quenched. So around the time of my 15th birthday, I decided that I was going to start travelling on my own, without the knowledge of my parents, by train. Until the other day, I had only gone to towns and places less than an hour away. But you see, last Saturday was the big one. I had been planning it for weeks. I was going to wake up and catch an early train somewhere 4 hours away. And that's what I did. I told my parents the perfect alibi, and they wouldn't expect me back till late. I caught the 5:20 train that morning and went on a nice big adventure. It was amazing. I loved it. And then it was time for me to go home. I arrived back at the station and waited for my train. In the corner of my eye, I noticed a man looking at me. I felt uneasy. I quickly pushed this feeling back to the side, worrying that I was just being judgmental. After all, he had had that kind of look about him. My train pulled up, and I jumped on ready for the first hour and first train of my 4-hour journey back. Initially, I sat down in a single seat with no window near it. I had a quick debate in my head over if it was worth moving and finally deciding it was, and I got up and went into the next carriage to sit down in a 2x1 seat just behind a 2x2, the ones with the tables, which had a young couple and their 4-year-old in it. On the other side of the walkway was another 2x1 and 2x2 seat, all of which had people occupying them. By the time I had actually gotten up, everyone else was seated and the train was about to depart. So when someone then walked through the doors I had just come through, I found it strange, but not enough to bother to turn around to see who it was. Whoever this mystery person was, they just carried on up further up the carriage after realizing there was no space here. 2 stops passed and nothing really happened. The 4-year-old in front stated she was thirsty, and the parents realized they had no water left. I was going to offer her some of mine, but I felt that it would make me look like I had been listening to their conversation the whole time. When the train pulls into the next station, the people to the side of me all get off the train, leaving the seats empty. The 2x1 seats are quickly taken up by a man who has clearly just gotten on the train. And once the doors close, the 2x2s are taken up by one guy on his own, who looks very familiar. Was it the guy from the station? No, it can't be. I'm just paranoid. But he keeps trying to stare at me. He keeps looking at me, and it's making me all kinds of uncomfortable. I try meeting his gaze, hoping that he'll soon stop, but it didn't work. He still kept looking at me. Then I notice that's when he's not looking at me, that he's watching this little girl. The parents haven't noticed, and I'm confident I'm safe because there's a couple in front, right? But that makes no sense. The little girl says she's thirsty again, and so the dad gets up to go see if he can find some water on the train. When he returns, he mutters something about their only being able to get water from the bathroom taps, but that's not a good idea and he really doesn't want to do that. At this point I decide I probably should just give them mine. After all, I can probably last longer than a 4-year-old without water. So I offer the dad my water and he gladly accepts it, asking me if I'm sure, before pouring some of mine into his daughter's cup. I say it's fine, and I get that good happy feeling in my stomach over helping someone else. However, this feeling is quickly replaced with dread, as I see the strange man opposite, sticking his thumb up, as if to say well done to me. It was such a small gesture that freaked me out so much. My brain started working overtime with its paranoia. I'm now 3.5 hours away from home, on my own, and my parents don't even know I'm here. How stupid could I be? If I get back, I'm never leaving the house again. Did I not listen to all those horror stories from the media? Did I not realize what happens to girls out on their own? I had to get myself to snap out of it. I had to make a plan. Getting worked up and paranoid wasn't going to help anyone. The way I saw it, I had 2 options. Get off at the next station and hope that he doesn't follow me, although at this point I was convinced that he was the person who walked past me earlier. Or 2, move carriage again and try to find the staff. I could just sit near them, and if he follows me I could let them know about the situation so that they could assist me. I decided 2 was my best option. but I'd wait until the train arrived at the next station and head back through the doors to the carriage that I was originally on, in hopes that it looked like I was getting off. The wait. The amount of time it took for the train to get to the next station honestly felt like a lifetime, and the man kept looking at me. When the train finally did stop, I moved quicker than I'd ever moved in my whole life as I got through the doors and sat as far away from them as I could. But it turned out that my original carriage was the last one, at the back of the train where the staff were not. If I wanted to get to the staff, I would have to walk past the man again, and I definitely didn't want to do that. So I just sat and waited for my stop. Thankfully, this carriage was a lot louder and busier. The noise was comforting, so I played my music on full blast, just making sure it couldn't be heard outside my headphones because I'm not a monster, and just let myself cry a little. Every train I got after that, I made sure to sit right by the staff, but I never felt safe until I was finally home in my dad's arms. I never knew a hug could make me feel so safe. Let me tell you a little bit about myself in order to preface the story. I am a 6'1" tall guy, and of an athletic build. I know it sounds like a douchey brag, but I assure you, the details are required to understand the story. I'm standing up inside BART. For non-Bay Area users, this is just a public train. I'm commuting back from a night of drinking in the city. BART can be awkwardly empty during the late night hours. Anyway, at the other side of the train is this lady in a burgundy dress, sitting down by the exit doors. She's looking intently at her phone, her head bobbing up and down as the train races on top of the railway. The ride is anything but quiet and peaceful. The train slows down and comes to a stop. It's not my exit, and it's not the lady's exit either, since she was still fixated on her phone. As the doors open almost immediately, a rapid set of smack-like noises are heard. It sounded like a machine gun, but weaker and an odd pattern. This brings the lady's attention as her eyes widen. She looks straight at me and says, "Oh nah man, better get out of here." I frown at her in confusion. She attempts to clarify things and says, "That's a gang calling, and they're the strongest in Oakland. They did this train down and now get out, or get your knees capped." And as she gets up and races for the exit doors, she exclaims, "I'm a bouncin', bye then." As the doors close, I'm only able to see her pale white neck. It was very white under the platform lights. I heard footsteps rushing down behind me, and I've never been so startled in my life. I saw people coming through one of the cart doors. The thing is, I saw people coming my way, and I heard their footsteps first. However, I could barely see their heads over the train's seats. These guys were tiny people. There were 5 to 6 guys about 3 to 4 feet tall. They marched towards me, footsteps getting louder. They stop walking and are right next to me but look away. A side detail, the train hadn't started to move yet. I also realized the doors had reopened again. They turn, look at me straight in the eyes with a mischievous glaze, but no smirk. Here's where the details at the start become important. I felt scared out of my mind. These guys are half my size, and I start to wish I had taken that lady seriously. One of the guys is looking at me, has a large top hat. He tells the rest of the group to go behind him, and does so with a squeaky but raspy voice. They follow his orders like their lives depend on it, and run right behind him in formation, the horizontal formation. He then grabs himself in a Michael Jackson way and begins to tap dance. Yes, tap dance. I thought of pulling out my phone to record this ridiculous event, but then second-guessed myself because this did not feel like the type of environment that would end well for me. They would definitely hurt me if they saw me trying to record them. He starts to make quiet but aggressive moaning sounds and gives me an angry look. He then proceeds to say he's going to count to 3, and if I'm not out the train by then, he will shoot me a new arse. I stand up and try to sprint for the doors, but my own fear makes my legs tremble and I fall to the floor. I didn't even want to stand up. I just rolled myself over as fast as I could onto the other side of that door. He stopped counting because they were cracking up so hard. The train starts to go, and the laughter continues until it completely fades away. As much as my ego was hurt, I was more relieved that I survived whatever the hell those maniacs had planned for me, in case I didn't comply. I take Uber for the rest of the route home, and I finally get to my warm bed. Unfortunately, I hardly slept through the night. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's ride. See that terrible pun? If you did, drop a like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe if you haven't already. And press the bell icon to be notified every single time I post, which is pretty frequently. If there's a story that you would like to share and have it read on the channel in future, drop it to my email or my Reddit page. The links to both can be found in the description. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.